Good morning, guys. Cheers. Today I'm going to talk about separation of church and state, what it is and what it is not. So, people's traditional understanding and what its original intention was to basically keep the government out of the church in order to prevent there to be a state religion. For example, the government does not get to say or dictate to people what they can and cannot believe. And they are also not allowed to censor and force people to register and have the government censor or go through their sermons before they are allowed to preach it. This is happening in China. This is happening in communist countries before. But people's traditional understanding or the new understanding of separation of church and state is basically where people say that the church is not supposed to be involved with government and that the church is not supposed to take over government. Now, that is not what separation of church and state actually is. It is basically to protect religious freedoms and the right of people to freely worship the God that they desire to worship. And it vehemently protects those rights. It is the same as freedom of speech, what you are allowed to believe and say. Now, the one argument that people always say is that no, but separation of church and state is important because we don't want another Middle Ages to happen. Like the Spanish, there was stuff like the Spanish Inquisition, there was the stuff that happened in the Middle Ages under the Crusades, and also it was similar to a caliphate where the Catholic Church basically ruled and dictated everything to everybody, and they persecuted people for not believing what they believed. Even translating the Bible was considered a crime, and anybody that was suspected of being a witch for no valid reason at all, just because some religious leader said that that person is a witch, they were accused and they were prosecuted for it in sometimes very violent ways. So there has been a lot of atrocities committed in the name of this secular religion. Now, Christianity is not the same. Christianity protects the rights and freedoms of others to freely choose. Now, people vehemently oppose Christian nationalism because they think that it is a state religion, but it is not. It's about being proud of your nation and proud of the God of your nation. It's got nothing to do about instituting a national religion. You might say you're a Christian nation, but that is not Christian nationalism. I tend to be on the side that preserves and protects the people's right to choose, because that is truly God's way. That is truly God's love in action. When we are freely allowed to hear the truth and freely are allowed to accept or reject it. And there be no consequences from the government for choosing to do so. Now, of course, there are things that we need to consider, such as crime. The government's basic duty is to protect people from the consequences that there is of crime. The government's job is not to give mercy. That is God's job. Only God can change a man's heart. But very frequently we find liberal governments that want to play God at the end of the day. They want to show mercy to criminals and then prosecute the righteous. things. And everything is upside down in a liberal's worldview. They want to play God, and that's not God's business. For example, what happened with Charlie Kirk. That young man, okay, aside from conspiracy theorists, if he's really the shooter and if he really committed that crime, he should quite possibly face the consequences of his actions and be given the death sentence. There's no business of a government providing mercy aside from divine intervention. I wouldn't put that aside. That guy should be given a death sentence, but his eternal soul can still be saved. His eternal soul can still be shown mercy and forgiveness, just like Erica Kirk has shown forgiveness in the face of this tragedy that happened. She forgave her husband's assassin. And I think that is something we all should do. Forgiveness and mercy and grace doesn't mean we give people free access to do whatever they want and not face the consequences of their actions, but it means that we restore that person into a proper relationship with God and allow them to experience the forgiveness in spite of what they've done, in spite of them not deserving it. Now, I listened to a few people that spoke on Charlie Kirk's funeral. Now, some of these political commentators, they spoke something about some of these political people that had the opportunity to talk at Charlie's funeral, most of them actually said very well things. And for a moment, I was a bit worried because when Stephen Miller came up, which is a guy I kind of like the things that he says because he's very good in his function of government. But then you get people that have like a sort of different slate of worldview, like civilizational excellence and talking about the Greeks and the other party has nothing to offer. And well, it could be true, but it's not really in par with what the funeral was all about. And I think it was about God's grace, God's forgiveness. It's about Charlie Kirk being a martyr and a vehicle for God's, for the gospel to be preached. And although he didn't make mention of God, I just think that he was making this about something else. And a very dear friend of mine, Jonathan Lloyd, he's in America, in Oklahoma. I was actually amazed by his wisdom because he says that some people latch onto Christianity because they accept a cultural form of Christianity where they are abusing it for the selfish gain. It could be for money, it could be for fame, it could be for just fitting in. But they hold on to a different worldview at the end of the day. And they're not really contributing to the movement in a way that makes them pay a price for that freedom at the end of the day. Because there's a lot of martyrs in the gospel that paid a heavy price for the gospel, but they did so facing the enemy, looking them in the eye and speaking the truth with boldness. And they did so in love. They did not put the other team down. And sometimes we have to expose the darkness. Yes, we do have to speak up against evil. But we do not do so out of a position of pride and arrogance that we are better than everybody else. Yes, we should commend ourselves for standing up for the truth and being on the side of right, but not in a way that makes us take the credit for it. It's all God. Everything is God. The Western civilization was mainly built on the gospel. And almost all of the technological and scientific breakthroughs came out of revivals. Nothing that the Western civilization built was done out of mere knowledge and man's pride. It was built out of crisis, it was built out of necessity, it was built out of revival. And former pastor of mine, whom I respect and love dearly, Benjamin Arday, he said a lot of technological marvels came out of revival, where the gospel was preached, where nations turned back to God, where nations was turned back to God by the preaching of the gospel, just like we have seen in Charlie Kirk's funeral. This was a movement that really inspired a lot of greatness, and I think this is what the nation of America needed. I think this is bigger than Charlie Kirk. I think people will inevitably misinterpret it and use it to embrace a cultural form of Christianity where they just enjoy the freedoms and the benefits of a society that has godly laws and godly freedoms baked into them. And they will think it's about something else, but it's really centerfold at the heart of it is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think this is what Charlie Kirk, at the end of the day, preached. This is what Charlie Kirk believed. And politics was just a vehicle for him to embrace that opportunity to bring his message across. That I honestly didn't know that before Charlie Kirk's passing. I thought he just enjoyed debating people and pummeling them in debates, which he was pretty good at. But at the end of the day, if you listen to what the people around him and the people that know him says, it's very different. Anyways, I've talked enough. My coffee is finished, so I hope you have a blessed day. I hope I gave you a new perspective on this and that you will see things differently. But you're free to disagree with me, of course. God bless.